everyone. Thanks for tuning in to Talk It Out with Pratika Karkwal, a place to hear stories, experiences, and impact in the fields of mentoring and mental health. These two are important causes for today's youth. I'm your host, Pratika Karkwal, a current high schooler who is a passionate advocate for these causes and is here to provide you with a place to hear and learn from the inspiring experiences of our guests. We have here with us today Sadie Sutton, founder of one of the first ever teen mental health focused podcasts, She Persisted, and a current student at University of Pennsylvania or UPenn studying psychology. She started She Persisted in 2019 and has accumulated over 105 episodes, reaching over 75,000 listeners. Sadie conducts impactful and inspirational interviews with experts, fellow teenagers, and social media personalities to reduce the stigma surrounding mental health and to inspire teens to boost their health and well-being by making resources accessible for everyone, everywhere. So, Sadie, thank you so much for joining us today. We're excited to dive deeper into mental health and well-being with you.
Thank you for having me. I'm so excited to be here.
Yeah. So, Sadie, can you start off with sharing your journey and your story to our listeners so they can learn more about your experiences?
Yeah, so I struggled a lot with my mental health in middle school and high school. I initially didn't really realize what was going on. I think a lot of us as teens, these things change very slowly over time. And I felt that as a teen struggling with my mental health, I didn't have like these years to look back on where my mental health was in a good spot and I was working to get that back to that point. It really felt like this was the only way I'd ever felt and that maybe I wasn't capable of feeling better or building a life that was more enjoyable subjectively. And so around my 8th grade year, I really started struggling with depression and then after that anxiety, and it showed up in all the ways that it often does for teenagers, which is low mood and less interest in things. My relationships changed a lot, more conflict with my family, um, changes with my appetite and sleep, and how intensely I was experiencing my emotions. A lot of the typical things that we see in teenagers when they're struggling with their mental health. And I ended up going to the hospital part of the way through my 8th grade year. And that was kind of the beginning of my treatment journey. And from that point onwards, my family and I really tried everything possible to try and get support and try and find treatment for depression and anxiety. And I was really hopeless. I really didn't think that it was possible for me to recover and build my life worth living. I thought that as a teen, I didn't have enough autonomy to make meaningful changes. I felt like people didn't get my experience because I wasn't an adult, so my life looked and felt different. And there was a lot of skills that I didn't have in my toolbox that would have been really helpful had I had them earlier on. And so from 8th grade to my freshman year of high school, I was hospitalized 4 times. I did intensive outpatient twice, dialectical behavioral therapy on an outpatient basis twice, individual therapy, everything you can imagine, whether it's group therapy, family therapy, occupational therapy, CBT, DBT, all the things that you try when you're struggling with your mental health as a teen. And nothing was really working. And looking back, I have that hindsight is 2020 that I didn't believe it was going to work. I wasn't invested. There was no hope there. I really hadn't cultivated enough self-esteem or even self-compassion to want a better life for myself. So my self-view was really wrapped up in my mental health as well. And things really changed halfway through my freshman year of high school when I went to an intensive residential program right outside of Boston called 3 East at McLean Hospital. And they do incredible, amazing work. They do evidence-based mental health treatment for adolescent girls and boys. I went to the girls unit. They pull from dialectical behavioral therapy, and they do that by the book to the highest clinical standards. And they just have the most competent and compassionate group of clinicians on their team. And so I was there for 14 weeks. I came in really struggling with suicidal depression and anxiety, and I had no relationship to speak of with my family. We weren't communicating effectively. I didn't know how to be vulnerable. They didn't know how to validate. There was just a lot of challenges going on, and I left no longer waking up every day and being depressed, which was a very foreign experience for me, and feeling like I understood my anxiety enough that I could cope with those challenges as they arose. And I also had built that foundation of a relationship with my parents and started to work on those really important communication skills because as a teen, your family life and your home life is really, really
Yeah.
crucial for your mental health because it's an environment that you're surrounded by a lot and it's also likely your primary support system. And so that was really huge. And after McLean, I ended up doing 14 months at a therapeutic boarding school, which was actually in the troubled teen industry. So I don't recommend those programs at all, and definitely not as highly as I do McLean, but I maintained my progress, continued to work on that stability. And at the end of it, I realized that I had done a complete 180 with regards to my mental health. And I not only shifted my mental health, but I really maintained that shift. And I was a year and a half later, and I still wasn't depressed or anxious or struggling with suicidal ideation or
Mhm.
self-harm or all these other things that had really consumed my life for a long time. And so I felt like I had to share this with other teens. And being a teen in treatment, you have this really interesting dynamic where when you're not struggling, no one's really talking about what their mental health is like or what they're doing to maintain their mental health. It's just kind of a byproduct of their environment or their routine. There's not really that awareness of why what they're doing is working and how maybe other people could implement that. Teens aren't really big in the self-help space like adults are. But when you're struggling, you are in a vacuum chamber of other teens struggling. You're going to group therapy with peers who are also in the same position. If you're in the hospital, you are surrounded by teens that are equally struggling and in crisis mode. And when you speak about your mental health challenges, you are met with that similar response of, I felt that way too. And we know, like the age old, like you put out the energy, you attract the energy you put out. And unfortunately, that's really true for mental health. And as a teen, that can be a really like kind of adding fuel to the fire when it comes to mental health challenges. And so I wanted to be that voice that I didn't experience in that echo chamber where it was like, I have been where you're at and I'm not still struggling. I'm completely on the other side of it. And I promise it gets better. Because a lot of adults told me that. And I really didn't believe them. I was like, you have more autonomy. You have so much control over your life. This just feels different. And as teens, we do feel things really differently. Our emotions are stronger. We're less logical. We do have less autonomy over our lives. And so I struggled to connect with that as I was struggling. And so I wanted to share my experience in the hope that it would provide a little bit of guidance and support and maybe some hope for teens that were actively struggling. I also really struggled to be vulnerable with my parents. And so that line of communication wasn't open. And I know that's the case for a lot of parents and teens. And so if parents can listen in and hear maybe what their teen is going through and what worked and what those thoughts feel like and look like, and maybe what their teen is trying to do, but maybe not being the most effective at. And then the other piece of it, which I mentioned, is that I lacked so many skills when it came to my mental health. I didn't understand how to cope with distress in a healthy way or build healthy relationships or what was important when we think about well being and mental health. And so I knew that so many of the things I'd learned in my treatment journey and beyond, now being a psychology student, would have saved me so much struggle and so much suffering. And so I wanted to share that with other teens. And a lot of it is really applicable for any age, which is really cool. And so I've been doing the podcast for 5 years now. I need to update my bio that you read on my website because I haven't done that in like 2 years, but we're like 190 episodes in, something like that. 250,000 downloads, which is really cool and exciting. And it's just my favorite thing. It's been so cool to continue to up level the insight and expertise I'm bringing to podcast listeners through everything I'm doing at Penn. And I've been lucky that I kind of found this interest and have been able to stick with it and just continue the podcast because it is so aligned with my larger goals, which is to become a clinical psychologist and work with teens after many more years of schooling and training.
Yeah. And of course, like in the medical field, it's a lot of, schooling and education, but it's worth it, for we need people like you who are going to spread that message. And it's very inspirational, like what you talked about with I think a lot of youth, what you said about we don't feel like we have that validation, right? That sometimes we need that external validation. We feel like adults have it and we don't. Like that, okay, it's okay to feel this way and that things will get better. And so and really when it comes to any like mental health issue, it affects, many facets of your life, when it comes to education, school, relationships, as you said. And then like really what you talked about, how you wanted to make, whatever your story was, you wanted to help other people who are going through similar stories, or even those who just want to take a proactive approach, right? Like whatever, wherever you are in your mental health journey, like everyone can have more self-care and more self-help in their life. So I love the work that you're doing, Sadie. Thank you so much. We all need it, especially as teens, and young people, because this is kind of like an age of confusion, like insecurity, like we don't know what we're doing. We don't feel like, at times we don't know if we're being understood by those around us. And only like, I feel like us as youth, we best understand each other because we're going through similar experiences, similar feelings, and all that. And then really two like key ideas that you talked about was how you really learned this idea of self-compassion and how that really helped you, and really in your journey focusing on yourself. And I know in your podcast, a lot of, interviews you do, like they focus on this idea of first acknowledging that, okay, this is what I'm going through, and then being like, okay, it's okay to feel that way and things will get better. Because I think that mindset shift is very important to acknowledge, because if you're aware of what's going on, only then you can, as you said, like get better and work towards whatever it is, your goal is, right? And then vulnerability, right? Sometimes, as you said about earlier, having that communication gap with whether it be parents or any other trusted adult or trusted individual in your life, I think sometimes that communication gap can prove to be, harmful in many ways, right? Because, if we're not connecting with those around us, it makes us feel alone, and it can go down that loophole again. And so, as you shared in your story, it's very important to connect with those around you, and, um, really just share stories, and just know that you as a teen, you as a young person, you're not alone. Like we're all in this together. And I think that's one of the great big things, that the work you're doing is so inspirational, because it shows that whatever, teen experiences are, they're universal. It's not unique to one person. And it's important to talk about these things, because that's where true learning comes from, and that's how youth are truly able to, expand. So kind of as going on based off of that, like what were some big obstacles you faced? I know you talked about some of them, but what were the biggest ones you faced, and what allowed you to overcome them? If you had some specific incident or story, like what was really instrumental for you?
Yeah, I think you mentioned so many of them. I think the vulnerability piece, asking for help, I continuously look back on that as being the most challenging part of my journey. I think
Mhm.
up until that point, at least for me, I was like, I can compartmentalize. I haven't said this out loud. I haven't accepted that like I'm really struggling and I'm not okay and this is bigger than me and I need support. And so to have that courage to go to someone and say, I don't know what's going on, but something's not right. And I want my life to look different than this.
Mhm.
And there's all these big, scary emotions that I'm struggling with, and I don't know how to navigate that. I think that is something that's really challenging to verbalize, whether you're scared of rejection or it's just challenging to put words to those emotions and
Mhm.
experiences. I think asking for help is one of the most challenging things. And the reason why I think it's like the most challenging point is that from that point onwards, hopefully, depending on who you go to and ask for help, hopefully it's a trusted adult and someone that can direct you in the right
Mhm.
way. But then you have people in your corner and you have their lived experiences to pull from when it comes to wisdom and coping skills and support and validation. And you're able to, a lot of the times, meet with professionals who have gone to school for years and years and years to be able to support you in these exact challenges and use evidence based resources to be able to help you get out of the position that you're in. And so even if you do have those challenging days, you have people in your corner and you're not navigating this alone. And I think the isolation piece of mental health is one of the most painful. Uh,
Mhm.
Self-compassion piece is another really big challenge and something that was very hard to overcome. And I think my advice for that is to just have the smallest, tiniest ounce of self-compassion. You're not going to wake up tomorrow and be like, I love myself and I'd love to build like the most beautiful, amazing life when you're like deeply depressed and you have so much self-hatred. Like that's not a realistic goal. And so what I did in those early days of treatment is I was like, I need to have some level of self-compassion because I was kind of backed into a corner of like, I am moving across the country to live in a mental hospital and I'm no longer in school because my mental health is struggling in such a big way. And this is my last resort. And so I had to develop that self-compassion, but I also had so much self-hatred and I was so depressed and really just really sad at myself about how my life looked because of the choices I made and the ways that I'd coped with what I was experiencing. And so rather than setting that unrealistic goal of like, tomorrow I'm going to develop self-love and everything's going to be great, I was like, maybe like 45 years from now, my life will be slightly less bad than it looks right now. And that sounds barely even like self-compassion. It's like the sliverest, tiniest amount of hope. But for me, that was really different from how I'd been thinking, which is like my life is on a downward trajectory. Everything sucks. Everything's horrible. This isn't going to work. Nothing is going to make me feel better. And so to be like 45 years from now, maybe it might be a little bit less bad.
Mhm.
That was progress in the right direction. And then from there, you just continue to build that snowball. And you experience so much self compassion and joy and pride when you build that sense of mastery. And that absolutely applies to mental health, just like it does school or work or hobbies. And so, as you see the progress you're making and you wake up and you're like, wow, I'm less depressed than I was yesterday, or I just rewired that thought, or I just used that healthy coping skill. That really, really, really helps build that level of self-compassion and that the amount of grace you give yourself and how motivated you are to continue doing the work. So the vulnerability of asking for help, the self-compassion, is a really big one. I would say those are two of the biggest challenges that people experience. But the tip and the antidote for both of those is to ask for help, know that it's going to be unbelievably challenging and that it takes a lot of strength and courage, and it's so worth it. And with the self-compassion piece, start small. Just like the tiniest little amount. And as you continue to make those shifts in the right direction, your self compassion will adjust accordingly. And then if you're like, okay, like I now think maybe something might be better someday, but I'd like to make bigger shifts and start to develop more self compassion and self love, then you can really focus your energy towards that work, whether it's like body image or self esteem or whatever it is. But just getting yourself on that trajectory of doing the work and investing in treatment and investing in yourself, I think starting small is a good way to go.
Yeah, I love that and what you talked about with like your advice, right? How people can overcome these obstacles, asking for help. I think it sounds easy, but really when you're in a tough situation, it's hard, right? And I think it's important to realize that as you said, everyone comes from different walks of life. Some people have gone through years of schooling, and that could be one perspective, right? Maybe a more educational psychological like science, and then maybe someone just based off of their own life experiences. And so if we hear like these different experiences of people, then that in turn, I guess it's like we're kind of giving energy to each other, like power and energy, because you feel like even, hearing your story, I'm so inspired. A lot of your listeners are inspired because I think that that's kind of like one of the things about being human, right? Like we connect with stories, we connect with others' experiences because we in turn, in some way, shape, or form, have gone through some, variation of that in different extent to different ways. But we all connect to these things. And then the other thing which I really liked is you talked about the like micro acts of self-compassion because it's hard. Like some people, it's easy to say that, just start loving yourself, wake up and look in the mirror and say I'm the most beautiful person in the world, right? That's easy to say, but when you're not feeling good, when you're maybe at a low point in your life, it's hard to do that. And I think that that's one part of validating the youth or young person experience. It's that one part of validating it is to acknowledge that it's okay to feel this way and take baby steps to get better, right? And I mean, like, I feel like when it comes to mental health, and I'm sure like you would agree with it, it's never like perfection. Like there's always just you're getting better, progress. I mean, everyone has like ups and downs. Like no one's like always gonna be perfectly, at their best and be like, I love myself every day. There's gonna be times when you're like, oh, okay, like today's not the best day. Like, why did I do this? Maybe some regret of, oh my gosh, or I shouldn't have done that, or that person did that better. Something like those forms of negativity it sometimes happens, and sometimes that what you said, having that goal of micro steps to okay, like self-compassion in baby steps, that's a lot more easier to implement because it's something that you can do in an everyday. Like you want to be able to set goals that you can actually follow through with, right? And I think that's a big part of wherever anyone is in their mental health journey. It's to have some level of self-compassion wherever you are, right? Relative to what you can do best. As you said, you started small with, 45 years from now, how do I want to be it? And it gets better from there, right? So I think it's just taking that first step and then from there just seeking, okay, just make a better, you feel better about myself better than I did yesterday. And, if we keep going, then you're moving forward, which is, progress and not necessarily perfection, which is perfectly okay. Because I mean, you can agree, like no one's mental health is always going to be at its like best. We're all going to have ups and downs because that's just how life is, right? So I think
Yeah,
that's important to realize.
100%. Yes, I love it.
Yeah. So finally, to wrap things up, Sadie, you always have so much valuable insight. I know we got a lot of it today. So what is one message you would like to leave our listeners with today as they move on with their days?
Yeah, I think we talked about this a little bit, but I think most people have heard of the 80-20 rule, and sometimes people apply it to like physical health, or maybe they're trying to adopt a new behavior or a habit, whatever it is. And I think it applies really well to mental health, and it has to do with self-compassion and giving yourself grace. And so when I think about my mental health as a whole, I try and 80% of the time, and even if it's 51% of the time, you're still technically on an upward trajectory. But 80% of the time, I try and fill my life with things that are pushing me in the right direction. And that could be getting enough sleep. That could be making sure I'm getting all my meals in and I'm fueling my body with good foods. Maybe it's spending time with friends and really building my relationships and making sure I have a community that surrounds me because our relationships are so, so important. Maybe it's building mastery towards larger goals, whether it's school or a job or a hobby that you're continuously working towards. And then it's also the internal things. It's like sitting with and feeling your emotions rather than avoiding them and thinking about how you speak to yourself. And when you are talking to yourself more negatively, rewiring that and being like, wait, no, I don't talk to myself like that. Instead, I'm going to say this more positively. And I'm going to make sure that I'm, again, putting things in that 80 bucket. And when you start to get your mental health in a better spot, I found it's really, really game changing to put 80% of those things like on autopilot. Like you see your friends in classes and you like know what to expect when it comes to like breakfast, lunch, and dinner and snacks. And you have your favorite shows and you're reading a book you enjoy. And you schedule in time to see your friends and family
Mhm.
members and you put things on your calendar that you're looking forward to. And so you're no longer day to day making those decisions that are like, how will my mental health be better tomorrow? But if you just keep living your life and going through your routine, that you are moving in the right direction. And of course, you're still making those intentional choices like, how do I speak to myself and how do I navigate these challenges? How do I ask for things effectively and set boundaries? But a lot of it you're able to rinse and repeat, which I think is really powerful. And there's always the 20% that we can't control. Maybe you do badly on a test, or you have an argument with a friend, or you're just feeling really lonely and down one day. We can't control for that. But even if you have like the worst day of all time, the like other days that you've spent putting yourself on that upwards trajectory are still moving you in the right direction. And you've really solidified those coping skills and those habits and routines and way you speak to yourself. And so I'd say that's one relatively simple tip that people can hopefully internalize and implement that isn't too crazy or challenging to remember, but also I think has really profound impacts.
Yeah, I love that. And it's like you're saying that kind of 80%, it fuels, kind of keeps you ready for that 20%. Like
Yeah.
the crazy things that happen in life because, unpredictable, anything can happen and you're not going to love all of it. But I think that having that 80% kind of ingrained for the most part into your, routine, it's going to really fuel you and help you cope with any challenges and obstacles that come your way. And I love what you said about, being conscious of like, you know, being aware of how you're talking to yourself, of how are you treating yourself? Because I think especially as young people, we're not told that a lot, right? That's kind of something more like adults are told, but being mindful and aware of, okay, this is not how you're supposed to, how you like, you wouldn't want to talk like that to someone else, right? In a bad way. Similarly, you wouldn't want to talk like, you know, in a bad way to yourself. So I think being conscious and aware, like we're not told that a lot of the times, right? I think that's like more like, oh, like a complicated thing that maybe adults are supposed to implement, but mindfulness and being aware of how you're taking care of yourself, of how you're like having a conversation or how you're talking to yourself, those are things that really can make the difference and be a game changer really in anyone's life, but especially for young people because we need especially that 20%. I think that for many young people that 20% can be take a huge toll right on our mental health. And so I think what you said about being conscious and being aware, that is what's going to help you really make sure that you can face anything that is thrown at you, because that's like important to make sure how your mental health can be good, but also your health as a whole, like health and well-being. That only stays good if you yourself are aware of how you're talking to yourself. So love that. Especially for young people, that means a lot. So that wraps up today's spectacular session with Sadie Sutton from She Persisted. Your wisdom is so inspirational, Sadie, and very important in today's time, especially because for youth, we need to reduce, like, there needs to be a reduction of the stigma and of the conversation surrounding mental health. And we need more conversations like this from people like you who are leading this effort, of course, our future medical students. So we're grateful for you giving your time to us today, Sadie. Thank you so much. For our listeners, have a great rest of your day. Don't forget to subscribe to Talk It Out with Pratika Karkwal for more content like this. And please feel free to share your topic requests. We'll see you next time. Thank you so much, Sadie, once again. Appreciate
Thank
it.
you for having me.
Thank you.